Hello everyone, this is Waterfall Joe and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be discussing why I switched from full frame to micro four thirds. I'm going to be going over the pros and cons of both systems and why I ended up choosing micro four thirds. So let's dive in. So before we dive into my current equipment, let's talk about what I previously shot. So I shot Nikon full frame for over 7 years. I first started with the Nikon D750 all the way back in 2017. This was my dream camera back then. I had been coming from a crop sensor and I was doing a lot of astro, a lot of Milky Way, and of course for that, full frame is the best. So I dreamed of getting a D750 because I was doing a lot of Milky Way stuff. So I did get a D750 and I had that camera all the way until 2024 when I sold it. So that camera was in my life for a very long time. I took some of my favorite images on the D750. And after that, I upgraded to a Nikon Z6 II in May of 2022. So I was a Nikon D750 user, and then I became a Nikon Z6 II user, and that's about 3 years now. Holy cow. So I've been shooting Nikon for about 7 years. Throughout this whole time, I had great images, but oh my God, I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying all the time. And back then I just kind of dealt with it. I never really thought to explore other choices. You know, I was like, full frame's the best. I have to have full frame. Why would I go down to a smaller camera system when I can have these best camera ever made? I don't care how much it weighs. And you know, that was my life for 7 years. So I was shooting full frame and I got some spectacular images. There's no doubt about it. And the Astro low light was spectacular. About a year ago now, I started really being intrigued by the smaller form factor. I don't know if it was because I'm getting tired of carrying all that stuff in my bag or if it was another reason, but I do know for a fact that in June of 2024, my girlfriend and I went on a trip to Iceland around the Ring Road, and I took my bag and all of my equipment, and I gotta say, with my full frame stuff, it was pretty heavy. And I think this was probably the first trip where I was like, this is a lot of weight. I don't know if I need to carry all of this anymore. I mean, this is pretty absurd. I had the Tamron 35 to 150, the Z6 II, the Nikon Z17 to 28. So I had only 2 lenses and a full frame body, but it was about 5 pounds of weight. I really started thinking like, this is kind of ridiculous, honestly. But I actually offloaded all of my Nikon equipment except for my Z30, which we used to film. I still have a few Nikon film cameras as well, but all of my Nikon equipment is gone. All of my full frame equipment is gone. I am fully committed to the micro four thirds, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So I have made the jump. I've completely jumped ship from my full frame setup. And once again, the only Nikon I still have is my Z30, which I film my YouTube videos with. So I was tired of all of the weight from full frame. I really didn't want to carry around all of that stuff. The other thing is, for me personally, I do not print and I do not make any sort of enlargements. And that's kind of one of the biggest benefits of having a full frame is the ability to print humongous photos. And I had to tell you guys, I am not a printer. I know I should print my work. I just don't do it. I don't know why. Maybe I will at some point, but you know, with full frame, you can make huge enlargements, no problem. And I just never did any of that. I also never really cropped into my photos at all. I know a lot of people sometimes like to take a picture and crop all the way in. Never did that. I usually shot a photo, and if I had to, maybe just a little bit, but I never cropped in a lot. So in my opinion, the printing and the cropping from full frame, I wasn't even utilizing that to its maximum anyways. And the only other thing I really needed for full frame was the low light, which I don't do enough of anymore. I live in Connecticut now. There's just not a lot of astro I'm doing nowadays. So I wasn't even really benefiting that much from having a full frame camera, and carrying all of that weight, I just couldn't really justify it anymore. It didn't make a lot of sense to have all of this heavy equipment and not even really technically need all of it. So I know that might be a little controversial, but I'm saying it here. For me personally, I don't think I needed all of that. So now let's talk about what I currently have. So in October of 2024, I finally pulled the trigger on a omsystem OM1 Mark II. And here it is. I absolutely love this camera, and I'm so excited to own this camera. I've only had it, what is that, now 4 or 5 months now, but I cannot say enough good things about this. And I'm going to talk about all the amazing features here in a minute, but let's just talk about why I picked the OM1 Mark II. So I have always been a fan of omsystem. I do work at a camera store where I sell omsystem cameras, so I've been around this space for a very long time. And I've always been intrigued by OM, and especially all of the computational modes. And I've always thought, that's really cool. Why does no one else do that? And that was years ago. And still, to this day, here we are in 2025, and no one else does half the computational modes that OM does. What are you guys doing? So we're going to dive into those in a minute. But in the OM lineup, I was debating between the OM5 and the OM1 Mark II. The OM5 was very intriguing. I did play around with one a few months ago before I bought this, and I almost pulled the trigger on an OM5 for the fact that it weighs pretty much nothing. It's fully weather sealed and stabilized, all for being a little tiny compact camera. That really intrigued me. I ended up going for the OM1 Mark II because I am a person where if there's a feature that I know something has, I would be like, why don't I have that? So for me with the OM1 Mark II, I knew that I have the best from omsystem, their latest technology. It's their flagship model, and I knew that it would not disappoint me, and it has not disappointed me one bit. Okay, so let's discuss my list of reasons for why I switched from full frame to micro four thirds. Now this is an expansive list, so I'll do my best to go quickly here. But of course, the first reason has to be the weight and the size. The biggest benefit of a system like this is the weight and the size. This camera here is around 600 grams, and the lens here goes from 12 to 40, which in full frame terminology is a 24 to 90 millimeter lens. And look at the size of this. And unfortunately, a full frame lens just cannot have this small compact size while maintaining an f2.8 aperture. Now, outside of just this lens, every lens for the system is relatively small. I just picked this up. This is the Panasonic Leica 9mm 1.7, and this is going to be my low light astro lens, as well as my wide angle. These two lenses right here, as well as I am going to be getting a telephoto at some point, but at the moment, these are my only two lenses that I'm going to be using for pretty much everything. I'd say this probably weighs 3 pounds or less total. That is almost the weight of one of my full frame lenses for back in the day. And for me, I can't possibly imagine carrying all of that equipment around anymore. Another benefit of micro four thirds, and in particular the OM1 Mark II, is it has some of the best in-body image stabilization in the industry. These guys packed over 7 stops of IBIS into this body, and my Nikon Z6 II did have IBIS, but this has even better IBIS. I'm able to get over a second handheld waterfall photography, long exposures, handheld without a tripod, and it looks perfect. I could do my best with the Nikon, but unfortunately I try to hold steady, but anything past like a quarter of a second, it is blurry. So having a camera like this that allows me to do those really long exposures without having to take a tripod, that just adds to the portability for me. I am a hiker, I am a traveler, I like to hike to waterfalls. The less stuff I can take with me, the better. And so far, the omsystem cameras are doing it for me. The micro four thirds cameras give me that portability. And while we're talking about hiking and traveling, we have to discuss the weather sealing. Now once again, my full frame camera had weather sealing, but I don't know if I would trust it as much as I would trust the omsystem weather sealing. This camera has been proven to have some of the best weather sealing in the industry. I've seen people pour water bottles on their cameras and the cameras come out just fine. I heard a story of a photographer who had an omsystem camera, and when they were done shooting, they would rinse it off. No joke. These cameras are incredible. Now you can't go swimming with this camera, but for me in the waterfalls and the hiking, if it gets rained on, I really have nothing to worry about. That is exactly the kind of photography that I do, is the hiking and the adventuring, taking this places that I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to anyways because I know it can handle it. That's exactly why I made the switch. Next point I want to talk about is probably the greatest reason to get a micro four thirds camera in my opinion, and that is the computational modes in the omsystem cameras. On the screen here you can see we have high res mode, live ND, graduated ND, focus bracketing, HDR. Why is no other manufacturer doing this? The computational modes in an omsystem camera are the greatest feature of these cameras in my opinion. I switched from Nikon to OM for the live ND. That is the most important part to me as a waterfall photographer. How has no other company, not even the big three, even thought to put live ND in their cameras? I can't possibly fathom why. This is the greatest feature in this camera. I use it all the time with my waterfalls, with my hiking. The ability to replicate ND filters inside the camera and allows me to get long exposures without having to carry ND filters, I'm sold. That is exactly what I want in a camera, and that's why I bought this camera. Why can no one else figure out how to do it, or why will they not add it to their cameras? I don't understand the need to carry 5 different stops of an ND filter or carry a variable ND filter, which is compromised for image quality as it's more based for video. Why would I want to carry 5 ND filters as well as having to put a big screw-on thing on the front if the cameras can just replicate it in the camera? This is the greatest feature, and that is what makes me feel that omsystem is one of the most innovative companies out there. I know that some cine cameras have ND filters, but I'm talking photography cameras here. omsystem is the only one who has a live ND feature in their cameras. You have the OM5, the OM1 Mark II, and now you have the OM3. All of these have live ND features built into the camera. And for me, as a nature waterfall guy, that is just the best feature of any camera. It just saves me pounds of equipment in my camera bag, not having to lug all of these ND filters with me. Now for all of the macro people out there, you have your focus stacking mode, which is so cool. You can take up to, I think it's up to 9 photos. You can take up to 15 photos and it'll stack them together and give you the depth of field of your macro shot without you having to go into post and do it. And for all the people complaining about the resolution, OM gives you a mode called high res mode. In high res mode, you can pick between a 50 megabyte and an 80 megabyte raw file if you're on a tripod. If you're like me and you like to go more handheld, they have a mode called handheld high res, or HHHR. This gives you a 50 megabyte file, and in the process of doing the high res, it gives you 2 stops of noise reduction. So for me, if there's ever a scene that I'm photographing and I'm like, this is incredible and I would love to make a humongous print out of this. For example, when we're in New Mexico in a few months, if there's a beautiful sunset, I would love to get a very high resolution photo of that. Instead of dealing with a humongous camera, it's a lot easier just to put this in high res mode and get a humongous file, honestly, way too big even for me for editing. So I don't use it that often. But anytime I'm needing a high resolution photo, I'll put it in handheld high res or the high res mode on a tripod. You can tell the camera, are you using a tripod or are you handheld? And if you put the camera on handheld high res, it has an algorithm that it uses to even stabilize your photo while you're handheld. These cameras will allow you to do pretty much anything without a tripod. And I don't think the same can be said for almost any other manufacturer. I could make an entire video just about the computational modes on my OM1 Mark II, and I might one day. But for me, the computational modes alone were enough to justify a switch. To me, that shows that the company is innovative and that they are looking for ways to improve what no one else is even trying to do. I love my Nikon, and I wish that Nikon would have put some type of live ND in their cameras. Why can they not do that? They're a much bigger company than omsystem. Why can they not formulate how to add that in there? I think this is a huge market for these things, and omsystem is the only company who's even thinking about it. Another thing that's maybe not so serious, but that I personally love is, as a nature photographer, I feel appreciated by omsystem. If you look at their marketing compared to everyone else's marketing, here, look at this 3512 for your weddings and your portraits. I don't care. I don't do portraits. I don't do weddings. I don't photograph people. Not my style. I photograph nature, waterfalls. I like to do birds occasionally. And if you look at omsystem's marketing, they obviously know their niche. They are focusing entirely on outdoor nature travel. And for me, I can resonate with a company that does that. I'd say 90% of the products from omsystem are fully weather sealed, and that does include the brand new OM3, as well as all of the lenses that were just updated a few weeks ago. And the new 17, the 25, the 100 to 400, everything is weather sealed. They still have a few lenses that aren't weather sealed, but the large majority of their lenses are weather sealed, and I think that's awesome. I know the same can be said for a lot of other manufacturers, but I love the fact that OM's equipment is usually pretty small and they still manage to cram weather sealing in it. I think that's really cool. For example, my 12 to 40 here, this lens is fully weather sealed and I know I can take it pretty much anywhere. And you know, that's a good feeling, knowing that this small package here, I would have no issues taking this pretty much anywhere with me. Another thing I'd love to discuss is when you go to Micro Four Thirds, there's an entire world of unique lenses that don't exist for any other system. For example, from omsystem, you have a few that I'd like to mention here. The 8 to 25 millimeter f4, That's a 16 to 50 equivalent in full frame, and there's only a few of those in full frame, and I don't think any of them are as small as the omsystem one. I think that that's an awesome range, especially for us landscape photographers. I love that they give you a wide angle to mid-range. That's also a pretty compact package. Another incredible lens from omsystem is the 40 to 150 f2.8, as well as the f4. Both of these offer an 80 to 300 millimeter equivalent, and they're really not that large, especially if you were to compare the 40 to 150 2.8 versus a 70 to 200 2.8, which doesn't even give you as much zoom as the 40 to 150, but yet is still much larger and heavier. The 40 to 150 f4 is a lens that I will be adding to my bag at some point, as you guys have heard me ramble on and ramble on. I really like that lens. I cannot wait to get one and play around with it. But that's an 80 to 300 equivalent that really isn't that large. I got to play with one yesterday. It is only slightly larger than my 12 to 40. So imagine an 80 to 300 equivalent for about that size. That's mighty impressive. The list goes on of all of the incredible lenses specific to Micro Four Thirds. You have the omsystem 300mm f4. You have the Panasonic 35 to 100. These are all so cool, and they're all specific to Micro Four Thirds. I love that what Panasonic and OM are doing, these unique lenses that really take advantage of the smaller form factor of a Micro Four Thirds camera. I love that, and I love that they are like, you don't need all this heavy stuff. Here's some smaller, more unique lenses. I love it. I love it. Okay, and my final point that I want to talk about is a little iffy, but we're going to discuss it, is generally speaking, omsystem and Panasonic equipment is usually less money versus a full frame equivalent. Not always the case. Of course, there are exceptions, but hand for hand, some of their lenses are less expensive overall. Now, I'm talking about, say, like this 12 to 40 here. This lens goes for about $999. If we were to compare, say, the Nikon 24 to 70 2.8, which is the closest version of this, that is well over $2,000. Reason being, it's a much, much larger lens, so more materials. Generally speaking, when you are shooting a Micro Four Thirds camera, you can look to spend a little less money for the high quality stuff versus a full frame equivalent. Now, there are $100 full frame lenses. There are $100 Micro Four Thirds lenses. Of course, we can always find an exception to the rule here, but if you're going to compare like camera to camera, lens to lens, you usually find that the equipment for Micro Four Thirds is usually less money because it's a smaller form factor. Okay, so now just to wrap up the video, I hope you guys like what I have to say. As I discussed, I made the switch from full frame to Micro Four Thirds for a whole bunch of reasons, but generally it's the size, the weight, the weather sealing, the IBIS, the computational modes, usually less money for the equipment, and I really just feel like omsystem is really innovating. I just recently read an F-Stoppers article, and it was like 10 controversial photography hot takes, and the author agrees that omsystem is the most innovative camera company right now. I mean, let's just say, who else is putting all the computational modes in? And with the recent launch of the OM3, that camera is now the least expensive interchangeable lens camera ever made to feature a stacked sensor. Who else is doing that? Why is Sony, Nikon, or Canon, these are humongous companies, why are they not doing that? So as an omsystem user, I feel really good knowing that the system that I shoot with is putting out a lot of good stuff. They're putting out a lot of good innovations, and I don't know why no one else is doing it. I don't know why there's so much hate on the system online. I think a lot of people really need to take a step back and gauge what they're talking about, especially the people who have never even shot with one of these cameras. I came from a world where I never thought I'd leave full frame. I shot full frame for 7 years with Nikon. I loved it. I spent all the money on all the gear. I loved it. But at some point I was like, why am I doing all of this? This is so unnecessary. So I made the switch. I feel so good. I love how much easier it is to carry all of this around. I think a lot of people have a lot of things to say about this that I don't agree with. So I'm happy with it. I'm not here to try to convince you to switch to Micro Four Thirds or anything, but I'm just going to say that I was tired of carrying all of the weight, and the pros outweighed the cons here. So I'm very happy with my decision. I hope to see you guys in the next video. Let me know what you think down below. What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on what I had to say? This is Waterfall Joe. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Take care. Have a great day.